when she was a little kid. And during my lifetime, you know, she would, you know, write things, and, you know, she would always have me read them. When I was about 10 or 11, she even entrusted me to type some of her stuff. But it had to be correct. It had to be totally correct. And I guess it helped me become a stickler for detail to a certain extent. But, you know, she is always writing. You know, as I grew older, you know, I'd be sitting in work and I'd get a call. I'd pick up the phone. Hi, how are you doing? Got a few minutes? I want to read something to you. For the most part, you know, not too many of her things got published. She had a couple of like collage / poems that were in the Crisis magazine, which is the national magazine of the NAACP, and a few other things that were in various newspapers, you know, here and there. But, you know, not a whole lot. You know, but, you know, it was something she loved to do. One of the things that she would do, and she did this for many years, was she would write a poem for the holidays. And she would type it on, you know, paper. And then, you know, make copies of that. Then once she had the copies, she would take like watercolor and watercolor the paper. Then on the other side, she would take like Christmas wrapping paper and put it around the back, and then fold it over. And, you know, she had her own greeting card, which she would send to, you know, her friends and family as opposed to the Hallmark cards. But at any rate, fast forwarding to, say, around November, her eyesight is failing. And so I would read some of her things to her. And so this particular, what became this book, had been sitting around there for quite a while. As I looked at her manuscript, it said copyright 1982. So it's been around for quite a while. I had never touched it. And the reason why I had never touched it was that my father was her second husband. And this book is largely about her life and experiences with her first husband. I didn't want to read about that other dude, so I never touched it. Knowing what it was about, but it was about him, so I didn't want to read anything about it. So back in November, and I'm reading her stuff to her, and so I picked it up. And it was, you know, it was long. I said, oh, this is something she'll enjoy, and it'll take a little while to get into it. And so I read it for her. And after reading it, I thought, wow, this was pretty interesting. And then my second thought was, I wanted to kick myself because this is my mother now at the age of 94 years old. Wow. As you might be able to guess, she does not have the memory that she had 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 32 years ago when she wrote this. And so some of the things that were discussed in there, I might have liked to get some amplification on. She no longer can give that. And her family members who might have been able to do that are dead, with the possible exception of one. So, you know, there is a lot of history that is now in the grave, and in her case, in lost memory. So I was a little upset with myself for that. But you know, as I said, this was November, December, and I said, well, instead of getting, you know, yet another scarf or something for Christmas, you know, my Christmas present to you will be that I will see to, you know, publication of this book. And so here it is. So I thought that we'd do a little reading from it, and just so happens that I wrote the words. And although I have not seen the film, I'm going to understand that the general premise is that Murphy's character has but 1,000 words left with which to express himself. Fortunately, that has not been the case in either a spoken or written capacity in the life of my mother, Winnie Artis Williams. Were that to have been the case, she may have run out prior to her teenage years, given that she began writing on her 10th birthday. Or she may have run out in the midst of one of her recitations of James Weldon Johnson's The Creation, or at some point when she was on stage expressing herself through poetry, prose, or drama. But given that this was not the case, she has lived a life in which she has developed a love for the written word and a love of expressing herself through writing. Her writings virtually span her entire life and touch on many of the things that affected her on a personal level, as well as the local, national, and international events that affected the world at large. In a sense, a reading of her work presents somewhat of an autobiographical window into her life. Then, as time progressed, some of her younger family members took a look, so to speak, into that window and were inspired to express themselves in their own manner. And just as an athlete in a relay race will pass his or her baton on to the next runner, this can be seen as a symbolic passing of the torch from Winnie Williams on to the next generations. I hope that you enjoy this work, and if it should inspire you in the same manner, all the better.
Yeah. We were staying in the same farmhouse where he secured board and lodging during the country school year, at the end of which time he would return to his home in Durham. It was now near the end of the term, and he would be leaving shortly after we did. We had planned it that way, Mary coming down from Philadelphia, while I would come upstate from Fayetteville, not from the far from the South Carolina border, where I was staying with my soldier husband, who was stationed at Fort Bragg. Mary arrived in Vineland a day or so before I did. She would stay a few days longer after I left. This was understandable. She was an old married lady of 3 years. Her husband a minimal supervision, while I was a newlywed of 1 month, living now in a strange southern setting, just getting used to the blatantly racist separate signs reading white ladies or gentlemen here, Negro women, or Negro men there, or doors of fountains, or wherever, just getting used to the title of Mrs. When she left Violet, Mary was to visit the CT in Fayetteville for a day or so. Just so it worked out. The lady of the house where we stayed was a kindly, talkative, generous farm woman, and her whole family, husbands, sons, and daughters, proved warm and welcoming to us. The food was marvelous. Mrs. H had to be one of the world's great cooks, and the accommodations were as pleasant as she could prepare them for the city girl guest. Earl, proud to have 2 of his sisters visiting him, went all out for our pleasure. He drove us all around the area, showing us the back country, homes, churches, school. He was highly respected and revered throughout, so everyone was very cordial to us. We met students, parents, and other black residents of the county. We visited and came to know many of the teachers and friends. So Earl, Mary, and I had a nice mini-family visit with each other. On the day I was to return to Fayetteville, mid-morning, I gave my parting thanks to those of the H family, having said my goodbyes to Earl at breakfast. And Mary and I began a short walk into town to the bus station. Now, most of our travels during our stay in the little community had been in Earl's car, and although we were well aware of the good black-white relations, we, fresh from years of West Philadelphia youth civic league agitation for improving the black condition in Philadelphia in all ways, felt that this peace rested tenuously on strictly regimented racial practices, written or unwritten, to which all blacks had to adhere. Walking into town, we had no intention whatsoever of trying to change old established customs and rhyme, but we did decide we would not move out of the way into the gutter for anybody. This would not be a totally single file and passing other doors on the two-space paved walk, for they would presumably be the same. We would know their intent by their approach and action, but under no circumstances would we step into the gutter. This was a firm decision. Well, as it happened, we had just one encounter, but it was a notable one. Approaching us as we came within a block or so of the bus station were two white men. So deep in conversation were they, and so mired in their custom of discouragement, still deep in our intimate conversation. We did not hear the angry sputtering of these men as they gazed at our even-paced strolling backs. And it was not until we had turned out of their sight that we could give away to our even then controlled laughter at their behavior and our satisfaction at the personal, albeit unspoken statement we felt we had made. But our statements were made, and loudly, all over town that day. I haven't taken my bus was in transit. Mary returned to her lodging at Mrs. H's without further incident. But on her arrival in Fayetteville, Mary told me what had transpired after I left. Earl, coming home, shared a story he had heard which had greatly upset the white community that day. It seemed that the two rude and uppity black women had failed to get out of the way on the Main Street sidewalk, causing two white gentlemen to have to step into the gutter. Earl had no idea, nor had anyone else, I think, that his sisters were the culprits. The key word was two. And as I was gone, Mary was solo back at the farm, and she didn't tell Earl then, for although he would surely have understood, if not approved, the implicit principle we were, so to speak, standing up for. Mary would not have wanted a flood of white hostility, or worse, to settle on him and her, on the good and kind people with whom he stayed, nor would I have wanted this. But safely away in far off Fayetteville, we laughed to our heart's content at the memory of these two white gallants spluttering their amazement in that gutter. No doubt, we're not loaded first come, first served, as should have been the case. No, rather the old pattern showed itself. All of the whites first, including the latecomers, moved into the place at the head of the first Negro line. If I was more taken aback than I should have been, given previous observations and experiences in the South, let's say that the Nashville decode had misled me, for sure. Being at the end of the Negro line, I was the last person to board until just as the driver was about to close the door, a Negro soldier ran up en route to Lebanon. He had to stand, as well as several other Negroes, since only the last row across the back window and two double seats on either side in front of it had remained for Negro passengers. I was stewing inside about this as I stood there midway up the aisle, but I was cool, and I didn't utter a word. As we proceeded towards Lebanon, passengers disembarked along the way, Negroes requiring such rear seats until only the soldier at the front and I, midway the bus, was still standing. Then the seat across the aisle just behind where I stood became vacant. I looked around intending to sit, but seeing that the double seat's other occupant was a white man, an Army officer, I decided that I would not court sure trouble by sitting beside him. Then, three whites left at once. The person beside whom the soldier had been standing, the person beside whom I had been standing, and the person just behind the seat, patterned, 4 empty seats, 2 Negroes standing. I had stood long enough. Now I sat down in the seat next to me. My seatmate, shocked, nearly speechless, stammered, You can't sit here." My hackles rose too. "Why not?" I asked with icicles. Why? Her mindless agitation at either ignorance or temerity, inexcusable in either case, which kept her stuttering. "You're black. You know that." I did indeed know it then, if I had not before, for she had told me very loudly. And of course, I was one who had taken part in various activities early in Philadelphia under the aegis of West Philadelphia Youth Civic League, protest against movie theater segregation, letter campaigns against racial stereotypes, picketing of Lancaster Avenue stores and other businesses in our communities because of their discriminatory hiring practices. All of that involved notwithstanding. I never wanted to go to jail, especially not in that God-forsaken place. But by then, the calm inner voice that urges us to survival was out-talked for a moment by my outer one, also decibels louder, probably trembling in anger. But I paid my fare just as much as you did, so I'm entitled to a seat if there is one. Having no reasonable response to this, she glared at me and then called out to the driver, thereby capturing the attention of the few people at the very front who had not until then been aware of this confrontation. Driver, this woman sat down beside me. So who are you? My husband is serving in the United States Army, fighting for democracy, and that means for us as well as for you. Why should he fight for you if I can't even sit down on a bus where I paid my fare? This could be called taking the war to the enemy country, but might sometimes be called a death wish. I probably would have gone further, but at that moment, I felt a soft tap on my shoulders from the woman sitting by the window in the front seat. When I turned, she jumped and went to the seat in the opposite seat next to the Army officer, and with an apologetic smile pointed to me to take her seat. In the midst of my anger and defiance, I was touched by the kindness and not wanting to meet a young black woman, a soldier's wife, an obvious stranger to these parts, to get into trouble. So I got up from beside my would-be nemesis and took the seat thus offered me. Still furious, still raging inside, my usual calm appearing, features drawn in bitter lines. Meanwhile, a few moments before I sat down beside my lady, the black soldier who, like me, had been standing ever since we left Nashville, had seated herself in the seat vacated in the front beside a white person, also a woman, who had made no objection. She simply looked out the window from that point on, nor had the driver, who had to have seen this in his mirror, taken any action regarding his sitting there. But when Southern Belle grabbed at his attention, the driver had no alternative, bringing the bus to a slow and easy stop off the highway. He stood up to reveal his impressive height and burly build, and turned to look the situation over. As it happens, I had by then moved to the seat behind Southern Belle, as I called her in my mind, or anyway, initials like that, so that the only seating pattern out of the order was that of the soldier up front. Get up, he said authoritatively to the black soldiers. Get to the rear. You know the rules. The soldier didn't answer him, except by a look. He just got up, came down the aisle, and sat down beside me. Only a look, but his look spoke words. It spoke to the empathetic memory of the chattel slavery our ancestors had to endure. It spoke to the pressures we as a people had long borne, erased hate, Ku Klux Klan obscenities and rigid discrimination. It spoke ardently to the present situation, which required him, as a black man, to stand until all whites receded, and then to be able to sit only when a seat was vacated by or next to a Negro, or was unoccupied and not forward of white. We, the soldier and I, were so irate that we didn't care who heard what we said, and we said openly all that was burning in our hearts and around the theme for the remainder of the ride to Lebanon. My SB in front of us truly got an earful. I talked about her and all of her, but although she turned a bright magenta red, neither she or anyone else on what had become very quiet, but said another word to us. very quiet bus said another word to us, to each other, or to the driver. What could they say to us? We didn't lie. At the end of the trip, the bus emptied very quickly. My seatmate and I wished each other well, and he went his way. I never saw him again. My husband was there, waiting patiently, linked arms, my suitcase in his other hand, my hat box in mine. We walked quickly around the encircled former slave market, lovingly preserved in the center of this small southern town. Then after passing through blocks of white or buff-covered 2- or 3-story supported mansions set into a vast manicured lawns exuding the good life, we finally arrived in our temporary lodgings in a neat, gray, clapboard bungalow in the heart of the Negro Quarter.